Hi. As we approach Christmas, we're all wondering what 2023 holds for us and what lessons can be learned from the immediate past to light our way. So welcome to the Roy Morgan Christmas webinar. Today we're going to look back at the year to September 2022 and we'll look forward beyond Christmas to retail sales forecasts, to the two-speed consumer economy and to new trends shaping the future of retail. We definitely live in strange and uncertain times, with consumer confidence well below 100, inflation high, and interest rate increases fueling concerns about mortgage stress and negative equity, and the spectre of recession. We would expect to see some highly predictable patterns of human behaviour. In the normal course of events, we'd expect consumer spending would be down, but it's not. Holidaying would be down. It's not. There are no vacancies. Economic and social predictors and the relationships we normally see are not behaving as we'd expect. So to get us going and help explain this, it's my pleasure to introduce social scientist and long-term partner of Roy Morgan, Dr Ross Honeywill.
Thanks, Michele. Welcome to the great retail bifurcation. Now, working with Roy Morgan using data science and a sophisticated evidence-based algorithm, we identified a bifurcation in the consumer economy that went a long way to explaining the apparent paradox of strong retail spending despite the cost of living pressures, and highlighted why we need to guard against the economic debate falling into the trap of false equivalencies, believing that all consumers are economically equal. They're not. Here we see a bifurcation of the consumer economy in full clarity. This graph shows actual retail sales between July last year and October this year, proof positive that not all consumers are economically equivalent. The blue line is retail spending of a consumer type known as the New Economic Order, or NEO, while the red line shows the spending of those we call traditional consumers. That red line uptick is just traditional consumers playing catch up with NEOs. Now let's add in retail sales forecasts for well into the next year. What we see is NEO consumers projected to spend 2.65 times more than traditional consumers. And what this reveals is that many retailers chasing the 10 million traditional consumers face an existential crisis as the economy slows. The NEOs in the fast lane of the two-speed economy are entirely responsible for pulling those retail numbers up, keeping the retail economy out of recession. The legendary business analyst Robert Gottliebsen recently wrote in The Australian that NEOs were responsible for unstoppable spending despite everything around them heading towards recession, while the 10 million traditional consumers are price sensitive despite millions of them being affluent. NEOs are motivated by a desire that goes way beyond the necessities of life. NEOs spend more frequently than anyone else on the planet. And NEOs are much more trusting of brands that align with their values and limbic or emotional attitudes, and more distrusting of those that don't. The dark green and dark red are NEOs, and the lighter colours are everyone else. The NEO big spender mindset means that while only 24% of the population, NEOs account for 41% of all retail sales in Australia. On the flip side, the spending averse traditional consumers, while making up 50% of the population, half the population, account for only 33% of retail sales. So why is this important? It's important because over the past 2 decades, retailers in Australia, much more than in the US, have developed an unconscious bias towards traditional retail orthodoxy of price, discounts, deals, and always being on sale. They're focusing entirely on the wrong consumer type as we enter one of the most dangerous economic periods since the GFC. They're in the wrong lane of the two-speed economy. But where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Well, the proof of the Christmas pudding is in the spending. In this pre-Christmas period, NEOs are forecast to spend $31 billion, with traditional consumers forecast to spend only $25 billion. In other words, each individual Neo is forecast to spend on average more than $6,000 in the pre-Christmas period. Each Neo spending $6,000 compared to only just over $2,000 for each traditional consumer. As I said, that's 2.65 times more than the traditional customers occupying the slow lane of the two-speed consumer economy. But why are the Neos driving the fast lane of the two-speed economy? Well, they're more confident and optimistic even than the most affluent traditional consumers. And after major economic downturns like the GFC and the pandemic, Neo consumer confidence recovers first and fastest, meaning they start shopping again well before anyone else does. And compared to traditional consumers, way more Neos want the best and critically are willing to pay for the best. Neos want labels they know, that they love and trust. They believe quality is more important than price. They dominate omni-channel retail and they're willing to pay a premium for products from a premium brand like David Jones. If only the current David Jones management would learn the lessons of the past and stop treating Neos like traditional consumers. So the existential crisis of being in the wrong lane of the two-speed economy is upon us. It's well and truly with us and is making the traditional retail orthodoxy the enemy of survival. The future of retail is being driven not by merchants who understand traditional retailing, but by a breed of consumers with a very different mindset, with a desire to enrich their lives with an Apple Watch, a Tesla electric vehicle, less wine but more quality, experiential holidays way beyond traditional tourism, and above all, retail brands that align with their values. Now, none of this is new. The Neo data science spawned books published on 3 continents, made David Jones a retail superstar almost 2 decades ago, is currently guiding the total refurbishment of Melbourne Central, and contributed to JB Hi-Fi becoming the most successful retailer in Australia. And in March, we'll be launching a reconfigured and much more accessible Neo 2.0. Now, it's back to Michele.
Thanks, Ross. Let's remind ourselves that looking forward, trust is essential in both lanes of the two-speed economy. It gives business leaders license to succeed and navigate in uncertain times and take swift, decisive action when disaster looms. And trust is a value creator for retailers. Over years of measuring the material impact of trust, we've found that consumer trust in a retail brand positively influences a consumer's willingness, particularly a Neo's willingness, to buy products with emotional value like desire or pleasure or fun. Importantly, consumer involvement is a purchase driver. So there's a significant two-way interaction between trust and involvement in a retail brand. Conversely, when consumer trust is low, non-involved consumers buy products with utilitarian rather than emotional value. And that means lower gross profit for the retailer. In a nutshell, trust creates value for retailers. But trust is a fragile asset. There's an old Dutch saying that trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. In other words, trust is slow to build but can be lost in a heartbeat or a hoofbeat. So if trust is the foundation of all human connections, it's distrust where our deepest fears, pain and betrayal surface. Roy Morgan data on distrust and our own lived experience since late 2017 reveal that distrust can destroy a brand's reputation overnight. And could there be a better example than Optus and its recent cyber breach? But more of that shortly. Distrust is the shock of discovering we were foolish to trust too much. And when I think about Optus and Medibank data breaches and the CEO's responses, one quote comes to mind. "It was a mistake, you said, but the cruel thing was it felt like the mistake was mine for trusting you." Distrust destroys. As I just mentioned, brand trust is fragile. It doesn't take much to kick the first domino in a wave of distrust, and watch brand reputations spiral downwards. What we need to do is keep an eagle eye on distrust. Every brand's future depends on it. Let's then take a closer look at Optus. This graph tracks Optus's trust, that's the green columns, and distrust, the red columns. So since March 2019, you can see how trust and distrust rise and fall in response to something Optus does or says. Then there was the customer data breach on September 24, and immediately we saw trust drop and distrust increase. In this chart, it doesn't look overly dramatic, but remember there was only 1 week of September data following the hack. So what happened in October? Whoa, just look at October. Now, there are 2 really interesting things about this slide. The first is that extraordinary amount of distrust. We've never seen so much distrust. Optus set an all-time record. The second interesting insight is how quickly consumer reactions showed up in our tracking. The response was dramatic, but importantly, we saw it immediately. The material impact of this crushing distrust was a 50% increase in customer churn rate. That means that somewhere between 250,000 and 1 million customers jumped ship, depending on which report you believe. So how do we measure trust and how do we measure distrust? Well, we're Roy Morgan, so we conduct a survey, a continuous survey. And for 5 years, we've been asking about 1,800 Australians each and every month which brands they trust and which brands they distrust. That's more than 20,000 respondents each year. We also ask them why they trust or distrust the brands that they nominate. And we record exactly what they say in their own words. This research is open-ended and unprompted. And that means for people who nominate a brand, it's so top of mind that they put it ahead of all other brands swirling around in their consciousness. So let's look at the trust winners and the distrust losers in the quarter ending 30th of September 2022. I'd like to start with an overview of industries. Now, we don't actually ask people about industries as such. We simply roll up all the mentions of brands in an industry. For example, we roll together brands in the ever-dominant supermarket sector and all the other retail brands separately. You can see supermarkets on the far left as the most trusted sector. The general retail industry is next to it in second place. On the other end, social media remains the biggest loser by far. Non-bank financial services continue to improve, and technology entered the top 5 most trusted industries. Mining and petroleum, though, dropped 1 place to be 3rd most distrusted sector. Now let's take a look at specific brands. First, we look at those brands with a net trust score. They're more trusted than distrusted. And Woolworths still holds the top spot as Australia's most trusted brand. Coles, Bunnings, Aldi and Kmart round out the top 5, unchanged. Interestingly, our very first trust and distrust survey conducted in late 2017 had Qantas in the number 1 spot. In other words, Qantas was the most trusted brand in Australia. Since then, it's been all downhill for the national carrier, with a rough landing at number 9 in this survey, falling 3 places since the June quarter, and now at serious risk of falling out of even the top 10 for the first time ever for Qantas. The ABC also continues its downward slide in the overall trust rankings, down 3 places in the September quarter. That said, the ABC is still the most trusted media brand. The winners include Big W and JB Hi-Fi, both up 2 places in trust. And ING is a winner for closing in on Bendigo Bank after losing ground for a couple of quarters. Apple and Myer are improvers, with David Jones re-entering the top 20 most trusted brands. Interestingly, 7 of the top 10 most trusted brands are retailers. supermarkets and general retailers. Now Australia's most distrusted brands, where distrust outweighs trust. Among the top 20 distrusted brands, Facebook or Meta, Telstra, Amazon and News Corp remain the most distrusted, while Google and Harvey Norman swapped places. Google improved one place and Harvey Norman's extraordinary decline continued, dropping yet another place in the rankings. Australians believe that social media brands like Facebook, Google, TikTok and Twitter cause more problems than they solve. And remember, in our previous research, we've seen that if we just look at the internet, we find that Australians basically believe the internet creates more solutions than causing problems. So it's really social media that seem to be so difficult. Google's included in social media rather than traditional media because traditional media is curated by content specialists. That's essentially it. Traditional media is curated, while social media is by definition a free-for-all. Other brands losing ground are Shell, TikTok, Twitter and Pfizer, a new entrant into the top 20 most distrusted brands in Australia. Overall, one gets the impression that trust is diminishing and distrust is increasing in society. Now, improvers in the distrust rankings are Google, McDonald's, ANZ and Optus. And, well, we know what happened to Optus after September. Let's now take a deep dive into the retail industry in Australia. I mentioned earlier that we separate the general retail sector from supermarkets, and this graph shows exactly why that's really useful. The green line at the top is supermarkets, but look at the dark blue line, that's retail. And as an industry, it's in dramatic decline. So even though the retail industry is more trusted than distrusted, it's in serious decline. Going back to the general retail industry, most people only measure trust. And if that's all we did, this is how the retail industry would look. And we'd feel pretty proud that it was so trusted. But that would have us in a fool's paradise. Because when we look at distrust, we see an entirely different story. And this is why measuring both trust and distrust is so important. The dotted black line you can see is the net trust score I mentioned earlier, and that's trust minus distrust. Interestingly, because we asked respondents why they trust or distrust a brand, we're able to reveal that almost 40% of Australians trust retailers because of the quality of their merchandise and high levels of service. Only a quarter specify low prices. And that flies in the face of traditional retailing orthodoxy. So which retail brands are the most trusted and the most distrusted? Despite its declining net trust score, Bunnings still tops the trusted brand rankings, followed by Kmart, Myer, Big W and Target. Apart from Myer, the top 5 all have one thing in common. You get what you see on the can. It's harder for a department store like Myer to pull that off, but the other 4 remind me of Aldi. Consumers see its proposition as uncomplicated and it's exactly what they get. On the distrust list to the right, Amazon and Harvey Norman lead the rankings as Australia's most distrusted retailers. Interestingly, Harvey Norman is the only of the top 5 most distrusted retail brands that's not a digital brand. This sends a warning to online retail brands to strengthen their trust and manage their distrust. Let's now then take a closer look at Bunnings and Harvey Norman. Just look at Harvey Norman, the red line. You can see its decline from positive trust territory in 2020 to deep distrust in 2021 and 22. Even everyone's go-to store, Bunnings, the green line, suffered a decline in its net trust position over the past 6 months. And you can see in everyone's frenemy, Amazon, the pink line, a retail brand that's never been anything else but distrusted. Let's take a look at what's going on at Bunnings. The first thing we see, Bunnings has very little distrust and a very lot of trust. But its trust is declining, pulling down its net trust score. So why is this happening to everyone's favourite weekend destination with the sausage sizzle? There are many reasons why Australians trust Bunnings. Great prices, terrific product knowledge, a great range of products, helpful staff and so on. When we awarded Bunnings with the Most Trusted Retailer Award a month or so back, I said Bunnings' close alignment with the community and Australians' dreams and aspirations were what made it so trusted. So why is that trust failing? All of you who know me personally will be unsurprised to hear that I have a theory. We almost never see a major national brand with so much trust. We've found that brands are more trusted when they have a strong community charter and a local presence, and this is true for Bunnings. So why the decline? My theory is that Australians trust Bunnings so much that it doesn't take much for us to wonder if we're being foolish to trust it too much. And over the past year, Bunnings has had a cyber hack of its click and collect data. It suffered a swathe of bad publicity for its use of facial recognition software. And if we add those to events like an increasing number of consumers believing that Bunnings' merchandise quality is dropping, we have one explanation for its loss of trust. Remember, trust is a fragile thing. Now let's take a deeper look at Harvey Norman. It's such a different looking graph. Harvey Norman's level of trust has been dropping, but in the context of its soaring distrust, the loss of trust is barely noticeable. One insight we've gained during 5 years of studying trust and distrust is that having a leader with a public profile is either a real asset or a disastrous liability. In the case of Australia's most trusted brand, Woolworths, Brad Banducci's profile during COVID played a major role in elevating the brand to the top. Same for Matt Common at CBA and Ross McEwen at the National Australia Bank. But not the same, however, for Gerry Harvey at Harvey Norman. Now, I happen to know that Gerry Harvey is a generous, supportive entrepreneur who's helped even save suppliers during hard times. But the public nature of his profile turned sour when he announced the company would not return $22 million in JobKeeper payments, despite profits doubling during the pandemic. And then, after months of public pressure, when he paid back $6 million, it was seen as too little, too late, and distrust for the brand soared. Our respondents bear this out. The dominant reason for distrust include JobKeeper issue, being greedy, being unethical, lacking integrity, and interestingly, overexposure in newspapers and television. I'm going to change pace now and look to the future. At Roy Morgan, we constantly work at the leading edge of technology, and in conjunction with our partners at the Australian Retailers Association, the ARA, we've developed an always-on sales forecasting engine to give retailers practical guidance on what to expect in the future. You saw the NEO sales forecasts earlier, but the great news for retailers is that across the consumer economy, we're forecasting record-breaking retail spending in the lead up to Christmas. We expect Australians to spend $66 billion, which is up 6.4% from last year's Christmas spending. This graph shows the impact of COVID back in 2020. See the yellow line? And the record spending this year, the green dotted line at the top. We also forecast that post-Christmas sales will be $24 billion. That adds up to $90 billion in retail sales between the 15th of November and about the 15th of January. If you'd like to see the sales forecast state by state or by retail category, just Google it, look for Roy Morgan Finding 9131 and you'll get all the details. At Roy Morgan, we also use insights from our NEOs, the future shaping NEOs, to map what the future holds for retail. And it's no coincidence that these future retail trends can only come to fruition in a climate of trust. So here they are. The first is zero friction and immediacy. Frictionless purchasing and fee-for-service fast delivery options are now mandatory. No checkout shopping. Amazon in the US, for instance, has totally eradicated checkouts. And no question returns. These things achieve zero friction for the customer. And also, they reduce staffing pressures on the retailer. Omnichannel and social channel, or social media. An omnichannel customer spends 1.7 times more than a single channel customer, almost twice as much. Customers want to stand in the store online. They want to get a feel for what the store feels like when they're online. And they want to research products online when they're actually standing in the store. Interestingly, the majority of Gen Z shoppers like shopping directly on social media. Yes, they're actually clicking links that take them to online or omnichannel retailers, but they're doing it without leaving Instagram or TikTok. That's zero friction. Premiumisation and value creation. Commoditisation consigns a retail brand to the consumer economy's slow lane. Premiumisation is the antidote to commoditisation, and it occupies the fast lane, the neo-land of the consumer economy. But affluence and premium are not equivalent. Premium is a consumer mindset, not a fat wallet. And psychology is what creates retail trust and retail value. Maxi flagships and micro stores. A flagship store is the new retail brand strategy. But to become a destination, a flagship must be prominent in a prestigious high foot traffic location, must be designed by famous architects, must be gorgeous, and sell its own branded products it designs and makes. The future will also be 10 micro stores of 40 square metres rather than one traditional store of 400 square metres. The dramatically reduced setup and running costs of micro stores deliver more profitability much sooner. And manufacturers will be the new retailers. Advances in technology and supply chains will see manufacturers become the new retailers. This personalised relationship between maker and consumer will be a direct threat to the traditional retail business model and will be most prevalent in the premium and luxury sectors. Now, before we bring this year's final webinar to a festive close, I'd like to foreshadow an announcement we'll be making early in the new year. At Roy Morgan, we have fantastic people mapping software that shows you where your customers live and where they shop, be they NEOs or your own customer segments. But now we're about to release a revolutionary new pixel that tells you if one of your target audience engages with your website or digital ad campaign and then tracks them into your store, your physical store. In other words, you not only see if you're reaching and engaging them, but you also get to see if you've motivated them into action, visiting one of your stores. This changes the game on effectiveness metrics, but more on that after Christmas. It's now my reluctant duty to bring this to a close. I'd like to thank Dr Ross Honeywill, with whom I've worked for more than 20 years, and in acknowledging that a program like the Roy Morgan Risk Monitor that surveys more than 20,000 Australians every year on their trust and distrust of brands doesn't just happen by itself. I want to acknowledge the work of David Laffin, head of the Roy Morgan Risk Lab, and Adam Ray, and the whole team. Thank you for joining us. Have a safe and happy festive season, and I look forward to welcoming you to the first webinar of 2022 in February.